Hey, welcome everybody back to another episode of Cinemacast right here on our channel, Arrow Entertainment. Be sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below, or you may be watching us on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/ArrowENT, or on our Rumble channel, ArrowENT or Arrow Entertainment, whichever it is on Rumble. So, today's feature, now this was a recommendation from a friend and fan of ours who is a very advent horror fan, as I am, of course. I grew up on horror. I didn't see a whole lot of horror movies growing up. I remember when I was like 5 years old, and I'm watching movies like Hellraiser, The Howling, Howling 2, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street series. There was a lot of films that I've grew up watching. And sadly, Puppet Master, today's feature, was one of those films that I never really got into watching. I remember seeing bits and pieces of these movies on television, but I never really paid too much attention to the stories. For this movie in particular, the first one, all I remember is it took place in a motel, and I thought there was like a motel full of people that these dolls were just randomly stalking and killing, you know? Until I actually sat down and watched this feature. Now, this series, the Puppet Master series, is like the James Bond film series. I kid you not. When it comes to horror, especially when it comes to horror franchises, like when you think of a movie, like let's say Halloween. Halloween has like what, 12 movies in total. You got a total of 8, which is 8 was Resurrection. Then you got Rob Zombies, which is 9 and 10. And then you got the David Gordon Green trilogy. And that adds up to 13. So there's 13 Halloween movies, right? Then there's about 11, maybe 12 Jason-related movies. Friday the 13th, Jason Goes to Hell, Jason X, and then you got Freddy vs. Jason, and then you got the Friday the 13th remake, which I think is about 13 films, maybe 14. And then Nightmare on Elm Street. Nightmare on Elm Street had less. I mean, what was it? New Nightmare was the 7th entry, and then, you had Freddy vs. Jason, which would have made 8, and then you had the Friday the 13th remake, which, would have made 9, so yeah. And you got movies like that, like, throughout the 80s and the 90s, it was always like a staple, especially if you're watching TV shows where, like, let's say Full House, and they're like, let's rent a scary movie, let's rent, Driller Killers 9 or something like that, like it's just like a comedic staple in movies and TV shows back in the 80s and the 90s, where it's like there's so many monster movies or slasher movies out there, and you're like, let's rent Face Killer 5, or it was even mocked in movies like Scream. Scream had like Stab 1, Stab 2, Stab 3, whatever. It was basically kind of parodying the events of the first Scream movie, but it wasn't doing it in a comedic way. And Scream is another franchise that is still living on. We're still waiting for Scream 7. So yeah, franchises like that, if a studio owns the rights to something and they know they can milk it for a new generation, like maybe, this generation of horror fans, they get into these older movies and they have an appreciation for it. And they're like, okay, well, now that they're familiar with the older stuff, let's introduce them to newer things, So yeah, there's essentially like, there's so many franchises out there and people wish that they would die off and such, like the Saw franchise. There's 10 Saw movies right now, with an 11th one coming out later this year, I hear. It's either later this year or next year, with Saw 11. And each movie is something a little different, or they try something, similar, but with a little twist, right? So I want to say maybe the king of horror franchises actually goes to Puppet Master, because I was looking it up. I was reading up on it, right? And going through the Puppet Master movies, and I'm going to count them out for you. Let's see, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. There are 15. Count them, 15 Puppet Master based movies. The last one came out in 2022 titled Puppet Master Dr. Death. I didn't even know about that. I didn't even know about the one before, which is called Blade the Iron Cross, which is about the puppet character Blade. Now, the last one I do remember hearing about, but I never saw it, was Puppet Master The Littlest Reich. And I'll talk about that in a little bit when it comes to mentioning something like The Littlest Reich, you know. But yeah, I want to say that when it comes to a franchise, the Puppet Master wins. It truly does. Because there are so many movies in the series that carry on a story and add more plots, more detail, more depth to the adventures, basically, of these puppets. Now, basically, with the way everything is situated, there's a timeline that is skewed all around. And just if you thought that the timeline for the Halloween franchise was pretty bad, Halloween has 3 or 4 different timelines based with it. And it's just so confusing. It's like if you watch Halloween in the order from 78 all the way up until Halloween ends, and somewhere in between each fragment or each section, you feel confused because you're like, what happened to that little girl who grew up? Where the hell did this teenage son come from? What happened to... Oh, she did die. Okay, so where did this teenage son... Where's she been at? Where's Lori been at all this time? And then you get to Halloween 2018. It's like, what happened to the son? What happened to Jamie? You know, what happened to Jamie Lloyd? You know, there's so many questions with that. And true horror fans really know the answer, that there are different timelines that different studios, you know, when they take over a franchise or they get an idea for it and they're like, okay, we want to create something new, something fresh, you know, okay, this idea didn't work, so we're going to go with this idea, we're going to go with that idea, whatever, you know. Whereas if you got a plot line like Nightmare on Elm Street, it's just goes straight through. You know, you got Freddy Krueger who terrorizes people who have grown up on Elm Street, basically, you know, and then he finds new victims, or some victims, you know, some characters carry over into other films and, you know, they become the main target or whatever. So certain things do happen. Oh, there is another horror franchise I forgot, Hellraiser. Hellraiser has like, oh, Jesus. I want to say now 11. I think there's like 11, maybe 12 Hellraiser movies, but still, when it comes to horror franchises, for me, that I know of, Puppet Master. Unless you're somebody who is into those classic monster movies, then you will probably tell me Godzilla. That's when I will agree with you. Okay, Godzilla there's a ton of Godzilla movies out there. They probably more Godzilla movies than Puppet Master movies, you know? But when it comes to modernized horror, I will say Puppet Master is the top tier for most movies in a franchise modernized for the horror scene. Now, Puppet Master, it was produced by Full Moon Pictures, and Full Moon Pictures they've been out since the 80s, I believe, but everybody's familiar with, you know, like when it comes to like B movies or whatever, Full Moon Pictures, a lot of movies are produced under those. I've seen a lot of them. But also, when it came to home video, it was distributed by Paramount Home Video. But, you know, then again, it could have been distributed by anything else. So, Puppet Master, which was released in 1989. It's an American horror film written by Charles Band and Kenneth J. Hall. And it was directed by David Schmoller. I hate it with these names. Schmoller. I don't fucking know. But the film stars Paul Lamont, Irene Miracle, Matt Rowe, Catherine O'Reilly, and there's also a scene within the first 5 minutes starring the late William Hickey. When did William Hickey die? He died in '97. God, he was only 69 years old. I thought he was older than that. If you don't know William Hickey, he starred in a slew of TV shows. He was also in the Tales from the Dark Side movie. He was Uncle Lewis in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. He had a lot of films under him. You know, he was a pretty solid actor himself. You know, he was, in a lot of great movies. You know, that guy, he was a legendary guy. You know, he died too young, 69. That guy died too young. So anyway, this movie does have a lot of German emphasis to it when it comes to like Nazis and such. Like old school World War II Nazism and all, but I think you learn that a little bit more into the timeline as you watch more and more of the films. That's what I believe, especially when it comes to the entry, the Littlest Reich. That's what I was talking about. It all refers back to Nazis and such. So this movie starts out in 1939 in Bodega Bay Inn in California, where an old puppeteer named Andre Toulon, who is played by William Hickey, is putting together the finishing touches of his new puppet, Jester. Not this Jester. Jester. Oh, I'm making sure I pronounced that right for you guys. Before he brings it to life. At this point, there are two Nazi spies that arrive at the motel and head up to his room. Now, at this point, he already has a puppet who is alive and keeping watch. So there is a reason why these two Nazi spies are coming after him. So while they're coming up the motel, while they're making their way up, he is putting the finishing touches on his latest puppet. And then he calmly places all the puppets into this chest and hides it in a wall panel compartment in the motel room. And right as the Nazis break the door down, he takes a pistol and commits suicide in the chair. Now, there is another thing that he does place in this chest that does become a prominent piece to the plot. Now, this movie fast forwards 50 years later to 1989, and it revolves around a character by the name of Neil Gallagher, who is stated to have passed away, and his funeral is to be held at this motel. And at that time, there are 4 psychics that are miles apart. They are all contacted by him, and they are all to meet at this motel. Now, here's where the story it got a little confusing for me in a sense, but I'm usually pretty good with piecing things together. Now, I don't want to try to give away too much of the plot, especially if you've already seen Puppet Master and you probably already know about it, but I'm going to try my damnedest to explain it. So, looking into the franchise, and it does explain it, William Hickey's character, Andre Toulon, let me see here, because I did have it. Okay, so the films, the entire film series, it focuses on a group of anthropomorphic, I guess I pronounced that right, anthropomorphic, which is the attribution of human traits, emotions, and intentions to non-human entities. Okay, so this basically focuses on a group of anthropomorphic puppets that are created by Andre Tolo. I forgot his name, sorry. They're animated by an Egyptian spell, each equipped with its own unique and dangerous device, and are represented as heroes, anti-heroes, and antagonists. Now, if I go back into the movie itself, I think it is explained in the synopsis here. So basically, here we go. Now, while the characters are getting settled into their rooms and everybody is settling down and getting acquainted with themselves, there is a character by the name of Alex who is played by Paul Lamette, and he meets up with the daughter, no, not the daughter, the wife of the late Neil Gallagher, and he tells her about the history of the husband as to why everybody is very negative in a negative way against him. You know, they all hate his guts basically, and for reasons. And Carissa, who is one of the characters, she is a psychometrist. I guess I pronounced that right. Who can see any object's emotional history by touching it. Another psychic by the name of Dana, who could tell fortunes and locate items and people. And Alex himself can foresee the future in his dreams. And they all begin to tell, or he begins to tell Megan about Neil, who was researching alchemy, and with Frank's help, discovered that ancient Egyptians had created a method of reanimating inanimate figures, a power also which discovered by Andre Toulon, that's his name, who was the last true alchemist. But because Neil had not made contact with them for a while, Dana and the rest thought he had abandoned them and took whatever he was seeking to himself. So, they all knew that he was seeking out what Toulon placed inside this trunk with his dolls, which was basically the formula or the instructions or the spell or whatever it was for, you know, that ancient Egyptian spell for reanimating inanimate objects. In this case, dolls, bringing dolls to life, basically. So it is explained in the movie, of course, that if it got into the wrong hands, that would be bad, you know. When the puppet master was alive, the original puppet master was alive, the dolls were moving around for good. They weren't killing anybody or anything, you know. They were, you know, it was his own experimentation. Now, if it got into the wrong hands, yes, you know, they could do some real harm. To which case, you know, now all the psychics are called back to this motel, and the dolls are loose, and of course, the body of Neil Gallagher, who's supposed to be dead, pops up in different areas, which adds a little bit more to the horror element of this movie. It's like, is this guy truly dead? Is he alive? We don't know yet. All we know is you got these dolls that are moving around the motel. You got Blade, who, you know, he dons a overcoat and a hat, and he's got a bladed knife on one arm, and the other hand, you know, is a hook. And then you got Jester, whose head is in 3 separate pieces, and it spins around to form different facial expressions. You got Pinhead, who is, it's kind of hard to explain. It's like human-sized hands, but a tiny head and a body that's a little bit more smaller. So he's like a bulky doll with human hands that can strangle you. And then you got Tunneler, which is the doll with the drill on top of his head that spins around. Leech Woman, which does make her appearance at least 2 times in the movie, is one that produces these leeches that, you know, she lays that out on 1 or 2 particular characters, and it sucks their blood, and it's very painful. Shredder Khan, I can't remember which one Shredder Khan was, or Genji. But yeah, these are the feature puppets in there, and with future entries in the series, they do introduce other dolls in a sense, and they give them different names, and then some other dolls, they do make their reappearances also, such as Blade or even Tunneler. So basically, you know, what this movie is, all these psychics, you know, they are brought to this motel, and it turns out that Neil Gallagher isn't, well, he's dead, but he's basically a zombie. So he eventually did find, oh God, what was his name again? Andre I keep forgetting his damn name. Andre Toulon. He did find Andre Toulon's spell, and he used it, to which not only can he reanimate dolls, but you can reanimate dead corpses. So after he died or killed himself, he was able to come back basically immortal. And that's what his main thing was immortality. And these psychics were just all brought there. They were part of his team at one point for research and all. But he figures, okay, let me just off all of them. Let me just kill off all of them. Of course, one of them makes it out alive with Gallagher's wife, or, well, ex-wife at this point. So there's a lot that does happen that is pretty much explained toward the end. And watching some reviews of this film, especially one from Cinemassacre's James Rolfe, who does Cinemassacre's Monster Madness along with Angry Video Game Nerd. So I even went back and rewatched his Monster Madness episode on Puppet Master. And a lot of things he did say in it was pretty correct. Like, with this movie, it does have a tendency to drag a little bit for the first half hour or so, which I think is probably why I never really got into the movie. Like, I knew it was about killer dolls, and it kind of interests me a little bit, but then there was like just the story or the plot or even most of the movie itself that I didn't really get with. But then after watching this movie, I'm like, okay, it's a tongue-in-cheek cheesy movie of the 80s, like it's one of those that can be like borderline B movies, kind of like maybe not like Troll or Troll 2, but let's just say it was originally intended for a summer 1989 theatrical release before being released on home video the following September. Puppet Master was ultimately pushed to direct-to-video release on October 12th, 1989, as the director? No, the producer, Charles Band. He felt that this was likely to be more financially successful on VHS than it would be in the theatrical market. It was very popular and since have developed a cult following and extensive franchise. So yeah, he did make a good choice with releasing it to video and not really fully to theater. The movie was pretty much built on a $400,000 budget. So I don't know how much it made in theaters compared to what it made in sales on VHS. But I will say, like, what really kind of got me a little bit was the movie closed out a little too fast. Not on a sour note, but I gotta say, like, the climax of the film, where, the whole plot is revealed with this character, and he's not dead, he's a living, breathing corpse. But then the dolls realize this guy, used the spell for the worst, and took advantage of the dolls and then pissed the dolls off. So the dolls get the revenge on Gallagher, and they do end up killing him. He's a corpse. He's not bleeding blood. He's bleeding like green fluids out of himself, but they do eventually end up killing him. Now, what happens to the dolls after that? Is there a closer, where, no, it's just a happy ending where Alex says goodbye to Megan, leaves the motel, and Megan picks up this this stuffed dog. This I forgot the name, the word for when the animal passes away and you have them stuffed. I forgot. It's like, you do it with deer heads. Taxidermy. This dog, it's a taxidermy dog. She picks it up and then walks away, and that's it. So I was like, okay, what happened to? I guess everything was taken care of, after a couple days or whatever. Like, there's no other mention of the dolls. There's no mention of the Gallagher character or whatever. It's just a quick closure, And that's all it is, like, okay. So reading up on the end of synopsis for this, okay, the other puppets witness this. which is what I just explained, and they descend on Neil. And Tunneler takes out the legs, and Blade pins him down while Leech Woman regurgitates a leech into his mouth and such, and da 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 da. So all this happens in one scene. And then, of course, it goes to the next day where Megan sees Alex off as she ascends the stairs. She brings Dana's stuffed dog, Leroy, to life. And that's pretty much it. So, is it the fact that Megan is now the puppet master? She now controls the puppets and all? I don't know. I would have to watch the sequel to find out, I guess. But I will say, like, after watching this movie, I almost feel like I must have missed out on a cult classic. And that's what these movies are considered as. They're cult classic movies. They don't have a real big following. And normally a lot of, people who watch it, it's tongue-in-cheek. It's like a really sour taste in their mouth. And like, I don't know about this movie. But I will say, if you are into, like, I guess I can call it the underground, the B movies, the ones that are direct to video, the ones that are real cheesy, the ones that are real shitty, the ones that people do, they do have an appreciation for, and I think that's what this movie is. It's a movie that once you see and once you understand it, you do grow an appreciation for this. Is this something that I probably would watch? Maybe I might watch it again, especially around, the month of October where, Halloween, of course, you gotta have a horror movie marathon. And this movie, it does go up there on the pinnacle with other movies that are related to killer doll movies, like, like Doll or whatever, Dolls. I think this was called Dolls. But it came out around a time when there was a lot of movies that were being made about killer dolls that were coming to life and such. So, yeah, especially like Child's Play. Child's Play had killer dolls in it. And I think what makes this one unique is you think about Puppet Master, you think about, a guy who creates puppets, and that's his art, that's his joy, that's his life. And the fact that this guy used a spell to bring them to life, and they are permanently alive because of this guy, and he has that control over them. But then it's like, okay, Dad died, what now? Who controls us now, kind of thing. And they don't really speak. These are dolls that don't really speak. Their actions speak louder than words. It's with these dolls. And how they got their names, I do not know. It's just, I guess, the way the companies put them together. That's like Hellraiser. Like, okay, nobody knew Pinhead as Pinhead until Hellraiser 2 or Hellraiser 3. He was just known as the lead Cenobite. Then you got female Cenobite. And then they gave Butterball his name. It was like, okay, Butterball. And then you got Chatterer. It's like, how do these characters get their names? We don't know. Maybe it's part of the story. How do they get out? I guess maybe it's because, maybe the way the fans of the movie see them as, and that's what they decided to call them. So Blade's called Blade. You got Tunneler. I was calling him Drillhead, but it's Tunneler. And you got Leech Woman. I mean, Leech Woman is fit. That's a very fitting name for her because she regurgitates leeches on you, But I will say that this film does have a certain style to it, and I guess, like, when it comes to horror, it does have a blend of some comedic value a little bit further on into the franchise, especially movies like Puppet Master versus Demonic Toys and such, which I probably will watch further entries just to get a little bit more of the story and to follow up with, how these characters play out. So, looking at the ratings for it real quick, Rotten Tomatoes gave this movie a 43% based on 7 reviews. TV Guide gave it a negative review, calling it a pointless variation on the killer doll genre. I wouldn't fully say pointless. Like, like I said, I grew up knowing what this movie was. I didn't know anything about the story. I just knew that you had these weird looking dolls. They were terrorizing people in this motel. And I think what turned me off was, for the most part, just the story of it. It's like I expected more of the dolls than I did of the characters. But now after watching it, I can see there's a lot more, there's the character development between the people. And I guess further sequels in, you get more of a character development for the puppets. The puppets, they have their emotions, their feelings, and such. So this movie is basically an introduction to something that has spawned into a massive franchise. Dread Central awarded a score of 3.5, commending the atmosphere, soundtrack, and set designs, but criticized the acting, weak script, and first act. I will say that this movie did have some very bad acting, and the script could have had a lot of better rework with it. So there is a lot of cheesy dialogue. There's a lot of different scenes where you just wish the characters had better interactions with each other, or better scenes in general with each other, or even solo. There's even a scene where the character Alex has like a triple nightmare. It's like a nightmare within a nightmare within a nightmare, and it's like, oh my god, like there was like so many TV shows and movies that I've seen that in. It's like, is this like the first time it's happened? I don't know, but it's like a false pretense to the next thing. It's like a false nightmare or whatever. It's like a false reality. I'm sorry, I'm not going to continue that one. It's like a false reality. It's a nightmare within a nightmare within a nightmare, and it's like, is he still dreaming, or is what the hell's going on? So yeah, it did have a pretty weak script, but I do think, like, despite having a script that wasn't written very well, and the first act was pretty drawn out and pretty dreadful, I think what really steals the show is the puppets, and their interactions with the characters. And I feel that there could have been more on-screen time for the puppets, because you got a movie with a poster like that shows, here's the puppets, this is what the movie's about. I feel like there could have been a little bit more screen time, maybe a little bit more put into the story that involved these dolls, but I don't know. Maybe the other entries do, and I will watch them here sometime soon. The review concluded that the review by writing, Puppet Master isn't what I would call a great film, but its heart is in the right place, and I've always been a huge fan of the evil doll subgenre of horror, making the film's shortcoming easily forgivable. Wes R. from ohthehorror.com gave a positive rating, stating, despite its flaws, Puppet Master emerges as one of the more enjoyable of the killer toy type horrors. And I guess I would say that. I would say that, as so many killer toy horror movies come out in the 80s, especially movies like, maybe Demonic Toys, or even Child's Play, Chucky, or maybe dolls in general, just so many movies that have come out. And I will say, like, Puppet Master is a pretty unique viewing when it comes to, these dolls that are handmade and they're cursed to live forever, their master brought them to life. The master's dead, and it's like, okay, now they are basically, in a way, cursed to live, until they are maybe destroyed in some way. But I will, like, there's a scene in here where one of the dolls is, like, thrown across the room several times. His head is pulled from his body, but he still manages to put his head back on and continue doing what he was doing. But it was a very interesting watch, and I guess I am glad that I finally got to sit down and actually watch it and give my overall opinion about it. Now, while it falls short with the script, the story a little bit, and the very cheesy acting. I don't want to say over the top or too over the top or underrated or whatever, but the acting could have, used a little bit of work. But other than that, the overall tone of this movie, the overall setting, everything, just for like an hour and a half of time, which is good, decent amount of time for a movie like this. I give Puppet Master myself a 6.5 out of 10. And I'll go back on what the one reviewer said. It's not a great film. It isn't what I would call a great film, but it does. Its heart is its heart is in the right place. That's how I would definitely put it. So 6.5 out of 10 for me. Also, if you guys are a gamer and you want more Puppet Master, especially even if it's not from the movie franchise, if you are a PC gamer and you have an account on Steam like I do, there is a Puppet Master game on Steam. That is right. Puppet Master the game. It was released on Steam March 1st, 2023. I did claim it myself. It is free. It's a free game. It's a multiplayer game. And you can play as several of the puppets too. So maybe in the future I will stream that game for you guys and see how it is. So anyway, guys, that does it for today's feature right here at the cinema. Today's feature was Puppet Master. I'm glad you guys took your time to sit around and listen to me rant on about this movie and other movies as well. If you guys enjoy our content, like I said, please leave a like down below. Subscribe if you guys enjoy our content. And did you watch Puppet Master growing up? Did you recently see it? What do you think about this movie? Let me know down in the comment section, guys. And today's feature was Puppet Master. Once again, thank you for being here today. And until next time, I'll catch you right back here at the cinema.